Today on Risk First Stars of Software, I'm talking to Colin Eberhardt. Colin is the CTO of Scott Logic, an author of the AI Governance Framework, and a familiar face at FINOS and Linux Foundation conferences, panels, and keynotes. FINOS being my employer and the financial services arm of the Linux Foundation. He's also held a seat on the FINOS Board of Directors and the FINOS Technical Steering Committee. I've worked with Colin for years through FINOS, and he's one of the people who's spent a lot of time thinking seriously about how we adopt new technology safely, especially AI, without bringing progress to a halt. And as one of the main authors behind the AI governance framework, Colin has helped shape how financial institutions and technology organizations think about managing AI risks in a practical way. So today, we're going to talk about what AI governance actually means in the real world, how organizations can innovate without losing control. And this is probably going to be a departure from the regular format of the Risk First podcasts, but we're really going to get into the effects of one of the biggest technological shifts we've seen in decades. So, Colin, welcome to Risk First.
Hi, good to be here. That was a great introduction. Made me sound really important. I like it.
Well, you are really important. So, Colin, before we crack on with all the AI related stuff, do you want to just give us a bit of a background of Scott Logic and what your organization does and what problems it helps solve?
Yeah, sure. So Scott Logic is a UK-based software consultancy. We've been going for about 20 years now, and I've been with the company for 18. We're around about 500 people distributed across the UK. And basically, we build software solutions for our clients, and we tend to work on the more challenging software solutions. So things like payments platforms, trading platforms, data pipelines. So rather than websites, it's more sort of system and platform development. So that's who we are. We work quite a lot within financial services, which is where my connection to FINOS comes from, but we also work with public sector organizations and a number of smaller sort of growth stage, medium-sized businesses. So we've got quite a range of clients that we work with.
And so before we crack on with all the AI stuff, how about in terms of risks then? So as a consultancy, you're helping your clients manage their software risks, really. They want to see new bits of software. They don't have the technical expertise to deliver it themselves. And so you help them manage that risk, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, software development is full of risk. I mean, you can't separate the two. Anyone outside of the field of software development has probably heard of various large failed software programs, especially government ones. I mean, any software project has a plethora of different risks associated with it. The most prominent ones are the risk of failing to meet a deadline, but that's certainly not the only way that a software project can fall apart. So yeah, we aim to deliver software projects whilst minimizing the risks as best we're able to. As you know yourself, that doesn't mean eliminating the risks. That's impossible or a bit of a fool's errand. It's more about being mindful of the risks, surfacing them, and coming up with meaningful mitigations. But it's a balancing act. So yeah, risk is part of what we do, but that's more of a byproduct. Our goal is to ship quality software products.
Right. Yeah. And I guess for your customers, handing the risk of that failing off to you is the advantage, isn't it? And you guys are all complete experts on the risks of delivering software. You've been doing it a long time. It's kind of the thing you've created as an expertise. So why would they not want to do that, right?
Yeah, I agree. I always err on the side of modesty. I'd definitely say we're good at it. We've had very, very few failed projects, and even those that have failed, typically they're from circumstances far beyond our control. Funnily enough, some of the projects that I worked on in the very early days of Scott Logic failed because they were for Lehman Brothers and the bank collapsed. That wasn't our fault.
Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah. But when that happened, it was fairly obvious we weren't going to ship.
Yeah. Or maybe even get your money back.
Well,
you were one of the many creditors banging down the door trying to get it paid.
There's an interesting story to that. We were on the very, very long list of organizations that were owed money by Lehman Brothers. And surprisingly, around about 10 years later, our invoices got paid. It was shocking. And what we did was we actually used that to set up a charity in the northeast of England called Altitude, which is focused on creating opportunities in software engineering for young people in areas where they don't have quite so many opportunity as the area where people like myself and others at Scott Logic tended to grow up in. So
Yeah,
not only did we finally get paid, we actually did something useful with that money.
that's great. I mean, that's a really nice story. I guess after 10 years, you'd probably completely written it off and you were like,
Oh, yeah.
and then it just, a windfall arrives and you're just like, wow, okay,
Yeah,
let's do
but
something good with
the
it.
decision was we could have a massive party or we could do something worthwhile.
Oh, I bet you had a party anyway, though. So, so before we get on to anything AI, because even before like the AI governance framework, you were contributing to lots of FINOS projects. So obviously, Scott Logic sees value in open source and software foundations as well, right? I wanted to get your view on that because obviously FINOS has a lot of membership around like large financial service institutions. We're trying to encourage them to contribute to open source. But what's the argument for somebody like Scott Logic? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, in my own time at Scott Logic, I went from working from one client to another, to another, to another. And quite often we were tackling the same problems over and over again. And sometimes we were making compromises by taking vendor solutions that were kind of okay, but could be better, or effectively rebuilding the same thing from scratch over and over again. And whilst that kind of pays the consultancy fees, it's inefficient and it's not very interesting. There's so much more opportunity to, rather than keep building the same foundations over and over again, consolidate on a single foundation, open source it, and do something more interesting on top of that.
Mm.
Uh, and as you know yourself, open source has become one of the leading models for software. A lot of the stack is open source, and financial services have historically been a little bit behind the curve in terms of recognizing that direction of travel and proactively looking for areas where they can consolidate with their peers.
Yeah, I think for good reason. But that's absolutely right. A lot of consultancies would see that repetition and just build a product around it, wouldn't they? And then,
Yeah, yeah.
but you guys felt that maybe that wasn't the way to go, and that open source is a more viable.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we have released one or two products in the past, but a product business is very different from a consultancy business. The way that you
Mm.
optimize a product business is completely different to how you optimize a consultancy business. And having the two side by side is quite a challenge. If we were to do it again, we would probably spin out the product side into a completely separate business because the dynamics are completely different. So it was it was more an acknowledgement that we wanted to remain as a consultancy rather than be proactive and build product. So
Yeah,
for us, then the natural place to, if we then wanted to build product but not monetize it, then the product becomes open source. So that's
yeah.
kind of the business level rationale for really leaning on open source.
That's I've heard that before as well. Other consultancies have told me exactly the same story. It's
Yeah.
like consultancy is like this high value, high touch kind of arrangement. Whereas if you start launching into product, you're always trying to look at margins and cut costs and it's a completely
Yeah.
opposite business model, isn't it?
Exactly. And then with product, there are completely different business processes that you need around support and maintenance.
Mm.
You've got to build a lot of infrastructure that's just very different to the consultancy side of things. And
Yeah,
we prefer to stay on the consultancy side. It's not to say that we
yeah.
might not do another product in the future, but if we did, we'd probably have a more conscious separation between the two.
So going on from that, right? So in the last, I think it's probably about 18 months old now, the AI governance framework. You and a whole bunch of other people from some of our sort of member banks like Morgan Stanley got involved in trying to map out what AI governance should look like. Actually, do you want to have a go at explaining what this project is, just to set the scene?
Yeah, sure. I guess probably a more interesting way of framing it is my own motivation for doing it. And I don't mind putting it on record that I don't find governance terribly interesting. It's not a thing that I get excited about, which is a bit weird being the lead maintainer of a governance framework. I don't do it because I find governance exciting of itself. The main motivation was for the past, 2 or 3 years, I've had a very strong feeling that this is one of the most powerful technologies that we've seen in one or more decades. So I want to do everything that I can to give people access to this technology so that they can do exciting and interesting things with it. And financial services have historically been a little bit slow to adopt. A good example would be cloud, for example. A lot of
Hmm.
financial services organizations are still on their cloud journey, whereas every startup is going to be on the cloud, apart from some that have
Yeah.
gone anti-cloud because that's cool as well. And again, you made a point. It is for good reason. They're not deliberately laggards. There are reasons for doing that. And I didn't want us to be in the same position with AI. Thankfully, I think there's a much greater sort of business imperative for adopting AI than there is cloud. With cloud, generally speaking, the view is it's a good way to reduce your costs, with agility being, I guess, a secondary benefit. Whereas AI is clearly about creating value, and banks like creating value. So, um, as I said, the motivation was not an personal excitement around the idea of creating a governance framework. It was more that through the work that I'm doing within financial services, I want to get AI into that. So that
Yeah.
was the main motivation. And again, I think that
Right.
was a motivating factor of some of the other people that were involved in the beginning. They just
Yeah.
wanted the tools.
Yeah, it is a hugely exciting area. And when you look at it, you think, oh, well, so as somebody who has developed in banks before, I can imagine getting very excited about trying to deploy like some kind of LLM service in a bank.
Yeah,
But then, yeah, as soon as you start to think about doing that, the problems start to arise. You start to think, well, how can I constrain this technology? How can I make it behave in the way I want it to behave? And then, as soon as you start thinking about that, you end up in AI governance and the AI governance
yeah.
framework. And you start to think about what the risks are and how you control for those risks.
And the interesting thing that I found in the early days when we first started putting this together was talking to some of the FINOS member organizations. There wasn't a clear home for this at that point in time. Some organizations were looking to, and when we talk about AI governance, let's be clear, we're talking about large language models.
Yeah.
All of the banks are very mature adopters and users of AI of a few years ago, the sort of numeric predictive AI, but this was
Hmm.
fundamentally about large language models. So in some banks, it was sort of delegated to the existing AI teams. They had their sort of model risk management frameworks, but those frameworks are designed for numeric predictive AI, not generative AI. So they
Yeah.
struggled. In others, it was thought that, okay, well, this is now a SaaS product. OpenAI is something we consume via an API, whereas their numeric models, typically they would be hosting them themselves. So maybe that's the clouds team. Maybe it's
Yeah.
their problem. But then you had the others where the early adopters were the engineers. They wanted GitHub Copilot. So maybe it's the developer experience team. Maybe it's their problem. And everyone I spoke to was pointing somewhere else, going, well, I think it's their problem or their problem. That was really fascinating. Everyone wanted it, but
Yeah.
no one could work out whose problem it was.
And meanwhile, there's probably a whole bunch of really, you know, keen developers who are just downloading models off the internet and spinning them up on like internal hardware or on bits of cloud and going, right, here we
Yeah.
go, let's deploy this.
I'm sure the
And then
banks would like to think their internal monitoring is better than that. But yeah, I'm sure you're right.
and so yeah, originally the AI governance framework was kind of focused on like that whole like if I use LLM as a SaaS, or if I download a model internally and I run it, how can I control the responses it gives? How can I make sure that it's not accidentally releasing customer information or like giving away free flights or something, which has happened before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's more about helping people understand the risks themselves. I think a lot of people just don't understand the full breadth of challenges that exist with adopting this technology. So it's it's not about being a prescriptive solution. It's predominantly about educating people. These are the
Yeah.
risks that you should be mindful of. It's your job to work out which of these risks are pertinent to the system that you're developing, but these are the risks that you need to be mindful of. And if there is a particular risk that exists in your system, there are some suggested mitigations. But again, there are going to be other ways to mitigate it. And you know yourself, some risks you don't mitigate because you're happy to accept that as a risk. So it's a supporting tool that can then dock into any mature framework for managing risks.
Right. Yeah. And this is something I talk about a lot in Risk First, is the idea that we have hidden risks and then risks you know about. And one of the
Yes,
great things about our risk framework is that it's telling you all the risks that you perhaps didn't know about or didn't think about properly. And it's like listing them out. And by getting all of those other organizations to contribute and like review it, that's where the real value of something like the AI governance framework lies, because you've now got like a pool of people pooling their experience and coming together and saying, well, we see this and this and this, and have you thought about that? And so you end up with a much better collection of both the risks and the mitigations from that exercise.
agreed. And what makes it really interesting here is that this is a non-deterministic technology, and most of the
Yeah.
technologies that we use are deterministic. So that makes it a much greater challenge to firstly to quantify the risks. With a lot of deterministic systems, the risks are binary. You're either exposed or you're not. With this, most of the risks are a sliding scale of we are potentially exposed to this risk, and we've put in place this control which minimizes the risk. And it's not quite the same as in others where you can identify, yes, this risk exists. We've put in place this control. We are very confident that we have almost entirely removed that risk.
Mm.
It's a much more complicated environment, which is
Yeah, and
why,
a lot.
to your point, there's some high profile failures.
Yeah, and a lot of the tools and techniques we learn from computer science are all about, right, I'm going to write this test to make sure that
Yeah,
X, Y, Z happens. And then maybe 9 out of 10 times with an AI system, it does happen. And then the other time it doesn't. And so that whole, the determinism aspect of it that you mentioned is like, it kind of nullifies or minimizes a whole set of techniques that we're kind of used to relying on. So there's a whole new class of problem to try and constrain.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is you see organizations like OpenAI struggle with this themselves. They clearly have a lot of tests that they apply to their models to make sure that they function the way that they want to, that they function effectively. And a number of these tests are published externally as benchmarks. So they can basically score and say this model is better than the previous one. It was really interesting when I think it was 5 or 5.1 was released, where it scored really well on all the benchmarks, but then loads of people said, I just don't like the way it's talking to me. They just didn't like it, and they didn't have a metric for that.
Mm.
OpenAI themselves struggle with the non-determinism. They themselves struggle with the way that it's very hard to fully describe the behavior and the functionality of this system.
Yeah. Yes, it absolutely is. And the weird thing is, well, okay, so the amazing thing I think about the AI kind of moment we're having here is that things are changing incredibly fast. Like you guys
Yeah.
started on the AI governance framework maybe about a year and a half ago. And since then, like we've already had like a couple of iterations of change. So like by the end of by 12 months going by, it was like, oh, we need to think about agentic software in the
Yes.
AI governance framework. And now I think we're having like this coding moment where everyone's discovering the amazing power of AI coding agents. And we're starting to have to think about like SDLC controls and where all that goes.
Exactly. Yeah, we've not got to that part yet, but I agree. I think that's something that we should be prioritizing with the governance framework. I think we should potentially be looking at, it might not be exactly the same governance framework because
Mm.
that one is designed to be general purpose. I
Yeah.
do wonder whether we need something more specific for the SDLC, because once you move to the SDLC, you can start to consider risks and mitigations that are a bit more implementation specific. I mean, you don't have to call out specific software providers, but an SDLC has standard steps to it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot more work to be done in that area.
And again, I also been thinking that this type of SDLC, so when I'm working on some open source project at home or like a bit of my own pet programming projects, the sort of controls that I need for that are probably not the same as if you are like running an entire banking IT department and you've got thousands of agents all changing stuff. I wonder how that class of problem is going to evolve and how we're going to see governance frameworks around that.
Yeah,
Any thoughts?
that's a hot topic for us at the moment. We're actually doing, as part of the day job, we're undertaking a number of projects with various different organizations looking to help them increase their software development velocity. So that is one of the many topics that we touch upon. What is a practical and suitable level of governance? And you make a great point. Your hobby project doesn't require the same governance model as if you're working on, I don't know, a fraud detection system or something that's doing,
Right.
I don't know, an order
Transactions.
matching engine. And so, yeah, we're actively helping a number of organizations tackle those challenges, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of CTOs losing their night's sleep and their hair over this kind of issue. It's just such a phenomenal change. I mean, so like my experience with AI code, and I've been using it increasingly over the last couple of years, but I think what I kind of feel is that I'm using pretty much the same techniques to code with. I'm not at the stage yet where I'm like giving 10 different agents instructions and saying go off and build this stuff. But I feel like I'm still trying to get the same software built. I'm using the same like testing and behavioral driven development and stuff like that. But do you think AI is maybe we're just at the early stages of this and maybe AI is going to change the way software engineering is done? What do you think about that idea?
I think it's going to radically change the way that software is done. And I don't think we're at the early stages. I think we're in the middle of the story where there are
Interesting.
some that the early adopters that are starting to see the new world emerge. And then there are going to be a lot of later adopters or laggards. It's already changed a lot. It's just that most people haven't experienced it in their day job.
Mm.
I think it's going to have the, the thing is, like, in its simplest sense, AI is a tool that writes code a lot faster than human beings can write code. But if you consider that to be true, then the knock-on impact of that is significant. In order to unleash that capability, we have to radically change the way that we evaluate software. In most organizations, testing and releasing to production is already the biggest bottleneck, not the
The
time it
actual
takes to write
finger
the
on the
code.
keyboard. Yeah.
So the knock-on effect of that is we have to seriously rethink the way that we release software. And then also, at the other end, there's a lot of development teams where you'll have probably heard of the notion of the absent product owner. You know, who is
Mm.
it that's deciding what it is that we should be building? It's going to put pressure on all kinds of other parts of the software development lifecycle. I think we're at a point which is going to result in a much more radical change to the way that we build software than the transition from waterfall to agile. So it's
Yeah, yeah, I'd have thought so. Yeah,
yeah,
but
and
but
it's
but I think what you're saying there though is that maybe AI is doing the easy bit anyway, right? The bit that took the time, like rolling stuff
yes.
out and getting the product owner to actually decide what it is people like that, convening a whole bunch of people and deciding what's needed. That was always the slow bit, and writing the code was always kind of the fun, quick bit.
Now I'm going to completely agree with you and completely disagree with you at the same time. When you're working on a product and you've got a good development flow going on already, typically you're right. Deciding what to build, getting validation from the client, that is an obstacle. But in a lot of organizations, there have been massive historical obstacles that have stopped development dead in so many different
Mm.
areas. Legacy is the clear one. There are so many organizations where there is a system that no one has touched or no one wants to touch that's 20, 30, 40 years old. It could just be 10 years old and just no one can understand it anymore. So if you're, yes, requirements, human beings are an obstacle for some types of software, but in others, it's the technology itself, which is a massive obstacle. And now, because we're rapidly heading towards a point where writing code is almost free, then that opens the door to all sorts of things that were almost impossible. So if you looked at a legacy migration, every now and again, you might be asked, well, that COBOL system, how much would it cost us to migrate? I don't know, 40 million. It would take us 5 years. Realistically, it could cost a fraction of that now using AI. So
Yeah.
you're, the this is the interesting thing about AI. It's completely reshaping the dynamics, and it's completely upending some of the things that we've always thought are truths. That legacy migration is hard, legacy migration is costly. It's not necessarily the case anymore.
No, and that's an interesting one, I think, because I can sort of see a world where for a legacy migration, you might say to your AI, right, build me an entire suite of acceptance tests for this legacy piece of software. We're going to
Yes.
rewrite the software in, I don't know, Java or whatever, because it was in COBOL. Then go and convert the software and make sure all the tests continue to pass. Make sure the tests that you
Yeah.
thought you needed were the right ones in the first place, blah, blah, blah. That could have been done before. I can see that that would have been expensive before.
Yes.
But at the same time, if it was really pressing, I could think that people would have done that before. So I still wonder in those cases whether the legacy migration didn't happen because there just wasn't the impetus behind it. Like people can carry on keeping the COBOL systems running. They can run it in the cloud. You can put virtualize these things, and there are other
Well,
ways to solve the same problem, isn't it?
I do think it has changed in the past few months. You
Yeah,
may have seen some of the recent blog posts. There was one just 2 days ago from Cloudflare. I don't know if you're aware of the Next.js front end
yeah,
framework.
yeah.
It's
I
a
saw this.
React framework with server side rendering. Within about a week, they effectively cloned it.
Yeah,
There was another example of Ladybird browser rendering engine. They had a 25,000 line of code JavaScript engine. Within a week, they had a Rust implementation of it.
yeah. That's good.
That sort of level of migration has not been possible
Well,
before.
I've done that
But the
myself,
interesting,
actually. Yeah. So
yeah,
I had this set of testing code that I wrote for FTC3, which I think I mainly used AI to help me write it in the first place.
yeah,
But then I discovered we needed the same thing on CCC, and so I ported it to Go. And then I ended up porting it to Java for another FTC3 thing. And then I've ported it to C# now. And so all of these different versions pass all the same tests. They're all like, and I didn't have to think about hardly any of it. I mean, there was a few lines of Java I had to write at one point. That was it.
yeah.
I've ne- I don't still
And
don't know how to
this,
program Go.
well, exactly. This shines a light on how things have changed because historically, there was always a high value placed on the polyglot programmer, the person that
Mm,
could switch from one language to another. There's no
yeah,
significant
no,
value in that anymore. And that's
no,
happened in the last year. That's crazy. And I do want
but
to get back to a point you made about your personal experience of you're not quite in the multi-agent world of spinning up tons of these
right,
agents. I think we're looking at the wrong thing by over-indexing on multi-agents. All the cool kids are doing that, Gastown, Ralph Loops or
yeah.
whatever. I think the most powerful thing is agentic loops. I don't know if you've come across that as a concept.
Tell
The
me,
idea the idea of that is that if you have a feedback loop that allows the AI agent to evaluate its work, you can then create, through the feedback loop, an iteration. You can get it to undertake much more complex tasks. And that's how a
yeah,
lot of these migrations are being undertaken. The the tests that already exist, or the tests that you're creating through AI, create that feedback loop. What that means is that your AI can operate autonomously for significant periods of time because it just doesn't give up. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if it takes it 20 or 30 times to fix a unit test. It will do that, and it will do that far faster than you or I could. So multi-agent, I think it sounds cool, but agentic loops are, I think, the key building block of super high productive AI engineering.
yeah. I feel like I'm starting to think about problems in that way now, where I will go in thinking, well, what's the technique by which I can prompt this the least to get to the output that
Yes.
I'm after? So I'll start with like like this testing framework that I was talking about. So I'm gonna write a bunch of tests, and then I'm gonna get the agent to keep going until the tests pass. And it that seems to be a really good way of working. And then I just review test results. But I also feel like as well, that whole not giving up thing is a problem
Yeah.
because I end up seeing these massive for loops or like these massive if statements in the code where it's like branched out every single possible combination. And I'm just like, whoa, hold on. This isn't, yeah, I can see what you're doing here. And you have to
Yeah,
really keep these things on a short leash. And so I feel like
I
the
agree.
bottleneck
You
now
have to
is me
watch what it's
reviewing the
doing.
code. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I've got an example. So there was, I wanted to experience this for myself. So 10 years ago, I did some work on React Native when that came out. And I remembered in the keynote, one of the Facebook, or yeah, it was Facebook back then, not Meta. One of the Facebook team basically talks about how they had re-implemented CSS Flexbox layout
Right.
in JavaScript so that they could then port it to mobile. And he basically said he took kind of like a brute force approach. He used the browser layout engine to create lots and lots of tests. Then he manually implemented Flexbox
Pass or
incrementally
test.
until he passed all the tests. It took him 2 weeks. I recreated that experiment and I did it in 3 hours by creating an agentic loop. So yeah, I basically got the AI to plan out a 9-step implementation of Flexbox. I got it to then, for each step, it would then generate its own test cases. It would validate them using a browser so that it knew the numbers were correct. And then it would go ahead and implement the algorithm. And for the first few steps, it managed to do a one-shot implementation. So for the more simple
Mm.
parts, first time it got it right. But as it got to step 5, 6, 7, at each point it was doing around about 20 to 30 iterations, discovering edge cases, adding new
Right.
unit tests. But 3 hours later, I'd recreated something that had taken one of the smartest people at Facebook 2 weeks to do. And that's
Yeah.
through creating an agentic loop.
Yeah, that's nice. And so that to me feels like a new type of software engineering discipline is like
Yeah,
trying to
I agree.
engineer these agentic loops and figure out. And the other thing I'm obsessed about now is code coverage. And
Yeah.
because if you start reviewing code coverage, you can see where it's started one approach and then given or forgot and then forgotten about it and started something completely different. And so you end up with all this dead code in your code bases that you can start to strip out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think tests and test coverage are going to become a lot more important because historically, a lot of this we did on trust. I mean,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
obviously we had tests and so on, but more often than not, when you were reviewing a pull request, there was an element of trust between you and the person who was submitting the pull request. As more of it becomes AI generated, I mean, I don't trust AI. If it screws up, I mean, it's not going to get the sack. We need different ways to evaluate.
Right, and it can bash away at the keyboard much faster. Like when when somebody generates 1,000 lines of code, you kind of feel they must have done it for a reason, whereas the AI could easily
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's true.
do that
Yeah,
by mistake. Let's get back to risk a little bit because I wanted to talk about the intersection of open source and AI. So one of the things that I kind of go on about in the book is like the fact that in the open source world, the number of packages available is increasing exponentially, and the number
yeah,
of CVEs is also increasing exponentially. We've got kind of this exponential curves going on, which is a problem for open source. And AI is not going to diminish. I can foresee a point where AI is just creating so many new open source projects and so many new dependencies that these kinds of dependency risks are just through the roof. I wonder if you had any thoughts about how you see that might develop. I tell you what, there's a bunch of different futures I can see for the open source world,
mm,
and one of them is that just we end up in AI generated slop. And then certain projects maybe become like the diamonds in the rough. That's one future scenario. What do you think?
yeah. It's really hard to predict. I completely agree that that's been a growing problem for a while, and it's not just the number of open source projects. One of the things that's changed a lot in the past 5 years or so is the depth of the dependency graphs,
Mm,
especially in languages like JavaScript.
JavaScript.
And JavaScript's probably the worst offender, but it's not the only one. It's not uncommon to install a package and then find out you've installed 150 packages. So
Yeah.
it's the complexity of the supply chain along with the sheer number of projects and CVEs. It's a massive problem. Well, it's really hard to know what AI is going to do to that. You could consider that we'll get more AI generated slop projects, but I'm not so sure about that. I'm more concerned that open source will start to dry up because a lot of the very best open source projects were created to solve human friction. People who are struggling with a UI framework. I mean, everyone likes
Mm.
building a new UI framework. That was very trendy for a while. But someone was struggling with a UI framework, and some of the best projects are ones that scratch the itch, that solve the problem for an individual that then happens to be a problem that many are experiencing. AI doesn't do that. AI doesn't
No.
start using React and go, actually, I'm not so keen on this. I'm going to create a completely new framework. So I do wonder if we do move to a world where the vast majority of us are prompting AI and reviewing the code, who's going to come up with the next project idea? And
Yes,
also,
because
AI doesn't have such a need for open source building blocks because it can build a lot more from scratch. They don't need all
yeah,
the little dependencies. You know, they can just
left pad.
create it. Yeah, exactly. They've got a couple of options. Firstly, they can recreate entire open source libraries, or if they just need a little bit of the functionality where you or I might install a library because we only need 10% of its functionality, AI is more likely to just generate the code itself. So I think they've got less need for open source than we do because we have to operate at a higher level of abstraction because our minds are slow. They can
Yeah.
operate at a lower level of abstraction because it's so goddamn fast. So
Yeah, I mean, basically,
really, I think open source is going to be in trouble.
I think this is a really good point. Because innovation is, invention is the mother, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And
Exactly.
if we're not faced with a problem that's hitting us over the head multiple times a day, then we're not going to invent something to solve that problem. And
Yes.
so all these new JavaScript frameworks, I guess, is the go-to example. That kind of invention that we see there, it's just not going to happen anymore because everyone's just going to make do with what they've got. So yeah,
I
this is
do
a
think
really
there's a very real risk it's going to dry up. And then there are the
mm,
other forces as well. I think the Cloudflare cloning Next.js is going to probably dissuade some people from open sourcing. I do wonder what the Next.js team feel about that because yeah, feelings and emotions are also a big part of open source. A lot of people put their free time into it and have an emotional attachment to your project. If I'd
yeah,
spent 5 years refining and creating a fantastic project that happens to have an amazingly comprehensive test suite, I'd be quite frustrated if someone then used that test suite to completely clone it with an architectural tweak and then took the
yeah.
community with them. I wouldn't be happy. So I do wonder
Uh,
whether there's going to be even a reluctance to actually share through open source.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. There's a couple of other sort of facets to this, though, right? One is that, so on for example, the FTC3 project, or in fact, in a couple of FINOS projects now, we're seeing people like stepping up and like just sending us PRs. Like Chris was saying that he just tries to raise an issue now and somebody will come along and PR whatever he's asking for, which is amazing for the velocity of that project. So if you're in a
Yeah.
popular project that's got like a good community behind it, it does seem like it's really helpful for getting some of the busy work sorted out. And yeah, then some of the maintainers on the project as well are like submitting all sorts of PRs all over the place, which is great. So there's that
That's
angle as
true.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. There are quite a few pros. There are quite a few cons. Who knows which way the scales are going to tip? I think there's going to be more negative impact in the short term.
Right.
In a world where AI is writing more of the code, I just think there's less need for open source.
Well, I've got two more things I want to throw at you in this
Yeah.
area. So one of them is we were discussing today how when you ask your coding agent, "Oh, I need this form, build me this," or whatever, it will go off and it will pick its own dependencies and it will just choose
Mm.
dependencies. And as you said before, right, people get quite attached to certain bits of technology. They have like strong opinions, whereas the AI seems to have strong opinions, but nobody really knows where they come from. It's like it will go and use React or something just because it thinks that's a good idea. And there's this whole idea that so somehow it's making technology choices for you, but how is it being influenced itself? Who's telling it what choices to make? And should we be worried about that in the future as a possible vector for manipulation?
Yeah. In a simple sense, the technology decisions it's making are effectively based on the averages in the data set that it was trained
Popularity,
upon.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's not making a conscious decision. Nothing that a large language model does is any form of conscious decision. It is a form of, as other people have said, pattern matching. And then some people then struggle to consider, well, if it's just pattern matching next token generation, how can it do these amazing things? Well, our brain is just synapses firing, yet we can have this conversation. Just because you
Mm.
don't understand how something simple creates something complicated and impressive doesn't mean to say it isn't true. So I do think the reason it's, if left to its own devices, you will almost certainly find that it's just making what you'd consider to be the popular choice. And I think
Yeah.
if you're vibe coding an application, that's absolutely fine. But if you're working in a business context, generally speaking, I like to make decisions around the technologies that I'm using. I like to have at least some say over the overall architecture of the system that I'm building.
Mm.
So I generally won't ask it to just build me something. I'll provide guidance around the tools and the technology itself. Maybe
Yeah,
it's
I think
just I
that
feel like I've still got some control. I don't know.
probably for some of the institutions we work with, they have like an invest and a disinvest list. And so probably for them, this isn't a problem. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I wonder if the route to open source success will be to like come up with a new library and then publish thousands of tutorials on it, which you vibe coded all over the
That would
place.
work. Yeah.
And
I
then
honestly
you'll
think that's
suddenly,
right. Yeah, that would work.
yeah, you'll have this amazingly successful library that all the AI, that a generation down, all the AIs will pick up on going, yeah, we should all be using Rob's crazy XYZ library for.
But I'll tell you a problem with that particular one, though. How many of the AI agents will actually go back and click the star button on GitHub?
Yeah, none of them.
You won't get the dopamine hit. You won't be GitHub trending. So you might
No.
win, but you'll lose at the same time.
So we need an agent star button on GitHub. Is that
Yeah, mate.
so just going back to like your kind of negative assessment then of like the future of open source. This conversation is going to age like milk, by the way. I'm probably going to put this out. I'm going to put this out in about 2 weeks' time, and I have a feeling that half of it's
And
going
I'll
to
have
be out of
changed my mind by then.
date. But but yeah, just for now. So like one of the things we talk about at FINOS quite a lot is the impetus for developers in our organizations to contribute to open source projects. So if, for example, if you're working for Morgan Stanley or someone, you find a problem in an open source library, you can go and fix that. You can push upstream. Now, if you're using an AI coding agent, there's two problems with this, right? One is that the agent's probably not going to think about pushing an upstream change to a project or opening an issue on a project. This is something that isn't happening yet. Maybe that will get solved. But the other thing is, if you are not allowed to contribute to an open source project, as many of FINOS's members aren't, or there's like bureaucratic limitations in place, the other option is, oh, I'm going to clone this project internally and run my own fork of it, which we've done some research on, and it's extremely expensive to do that, but it does happen.
It
But
was extremely expensive.
that's my point, yeah. But that research is now out of date, and
Yes.
maybe running huge numbers of internal forks just got a lot cheaper.
Yeah,
So
I'd not thought of that. It probably has. Which again, I mean, I've been doing open source for longer than I can remember, long before I was a professional software developer. So I don't mean to sound too negative about it, but I think we do have to think about the potential negative impacts of AI, or we'll sleepwalk into something that we simply don't like. And yeah, I do think AI genuinely would make it easier to create an internal fork. But the problem is when you're talking about open source within most organizations, they tend to just get hung up on open source just being about the code. You fork an open source project and you've got a copy of the code. For me, open source, genuine involvement in an open source project is being able to have, is being invested in its future roadmap. It's being invested in the community. That community could be your future recruits, for example. That roadmap can be steered towards features that are beneficial to yourself. So arguments about open source, which just focus on the code, I think miss a lot of the point. And again, as we've talked about, AI makes writing code a lot faster, but it's not going to change any of those other positive dynamics around open source.
yeah. And I think there's open source and there's open source, right? Because if you think to something like the AI governance framework, right, it's like a collection of knowledge. It's not There's not a lot of code
Yes.
in there. And collecting the sort of institutional knowledge of a lot of organizations together is a really valuable thing
Yes.
outside of what I mean, you can use that as the basis of vibe coding something up, perhaps, but assembling that institutional knowledge in the first place is the important part. So maybe,
Exactly. In organizations like FINOS and Linux Foundation, one of the benefits, significant benefits of those organizations is just getting people into a safe space where they can talk to each other. And
mm,
that might not result in any code or pull request or standards or whatever, but there's still a tremendous amount of value in that.
yeah. Well, I think standards is a really interesting area because whereas a lot of open source libraries are all about just helping you do something a bit more quickly, like a standard usually is an agreement between different
Yeah.
parties on a certain way of behaving. And that kind of thing suddenly I feel becomes way more valuable in the future. The fact that you've been able to come up with a standard is almost the hard part. That's if coding becomes easier, then everything else becomes harder as a sort of a balancing act, right? And so standards work for me seems to be like a really big area where the value is now even greater than it was before. Because again, AI is not going to talk to other AIs and come up with a standard around like desktop interoperability or something.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. I think I agree. I think standards are going are potentially going to be a durable, high value artifact because even if you can use an AI to replicate an existing open source project, so even it may challenge the standards that allow internal interoperability, but it's in no way going to challenge the standards that allow different organizations to communicate with each other. And that's still going to be an incredibly important thing.
Yeah, because I think we're not going to see like the institutions we have going away because of this. I think this is almost reinforcing like the institutions we have. I think actually
Yeah,
that's a good question, right? So for a firm, a consultancy firm like Scott Logic, how do you see this affecting the sort of work that you do and the type of work that you offer your customers?
that's a good
I'm asking all
question.
the difficult questions today.
Yeah, I think it's the thing
It
in a
remains to be seen,
general,
perhaps.
yeah, I see it as lots and lots of opportunity. I don't see it as the
Yeah.
death of the software engineer or the death of the software consultancy. I see it
Oh no, I
more as
wasn't.
yeah, but it's then hard to articulate exactly what the opportunity is. But the thing is, taking a step back, I think we're in a period of greater change than we've ever been in. And that is always going to be an opportunity. For me, it's about working
Yeah.
out what are the new patterns and practices? What are the new ways to capitalize on this technology? And I guess getting to the theme of your podcast and your book, manage the risks and maintain the quality. There there's no one's going to tell you how to do that at the moment. Well,
No.
there's going to be loads of people that are going to try to tell you how to do that, but there's very little that's proven. And more often than not, the people that are claiming success tend to be working in very much clean room, greenfield environments. They don't tend to be working in the more challenging enterprise environments. So working out how to unlock the value of this technology in a messy enterprise environment, that's hard. And that's an opportunity. That's exciting.
Mm, yeah.
Well, one of the other things that I do find quite interesting is an interesting trend that I've seen in the past couple of months is quite a lot of blog posts about typically senior engineers who are feeling quite sad and unhappy about the loss of their craft.
Yeah.
There's the CEOs and typically the CTOs and so on getting super excited. We're going to move faster in the business. But there is a lot of genuine unease. And it's not unease coming from the perspective of, I don't believe in this technology or I don't understand it. It's people that believe in the technology, understand it, but they're a little bit worried about what their job's going to be in the future. And
Mm,
fundamentally, is that going to be a job that they still enjoy? I think that's
yeah.
I've seen so many blog posts like that in just the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, personally, I'm enjoying it more than ever. I'm enjoying my job more than ever. I
Yeah,
feel like the amount of just typing has gone way down, and I always hated the
yeah,
typing part. I'm just not a very good typist. I'll be honest. I have lots of ideas, and I'm good at the structure, but actually pressing the buttons on the keyboard was
Yep.
always the tedious bit. So I'm really glad to not have to do quite so much of that. Being able to see my ideas come to life in minutes rather than hours feels like a massive force multiplier. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of up. I'm really excited about it for that reason.
There was a really good blog post I read a few weeks ago that just had a very simple uh, model for this. And they basically characterized people as either builders or thinkers. And
Right.
in reality, it's a spectrum, but the builders are the people that get the dopamine hit, the motivation from creating something and using it or giving it to someone else. The
Right.
thinkers are the people that are excited about the the actual act of building itself. They're the tinkerers, the people that
Mm.
have the emotional attachment to the code rather than the product. And unfortunately, the thinkers are the ones that are struggling, and the
Uh,
builders are the ones that are really getting excited by
yeah.
this.
Yeah. I
I
think
think
I'm
it's a,
probably
I
a
think it's a
builder then.
nice mental
Yeah.
model. But you've been around software for a long time. With that model, you can almost go around the people that you know and go builder, builder, thinker, thinker, thinker. There are so many people in software who are the thinker types, the people that you have to tear them away from the keyboard to actually remind
Mm.
them what it is they're supposed to be doing, whilst they're going through multiple refactorings and creating the most awesome library you could imagine, but have forgotten what it is they're actually building in the first place.
So where do you fit on this in this taxonomy, Colin? Are you on the builder side
Well,
or the thinker side?
it's funny. I think I've done a bit of both because I was looking at the hobby projects that I was doing about 5 years ago. I was doing a lot of stuff with WebAssembly, and
Right.
I was doing things like writing emulators. I was writing an Atari 2600 emulator, and I never
Wow.
once did it because I wanted to actually play the games. I just wanted to build the emulator. So I was definitely a thinker. But
Right.
now I've got my latest hobby project is my son does go-kart racing. And previously I tracked all of his sessions on a spreadsheet, which is a bit of a pain in the backside. But now I've got my own progressive web app that I can use. It's got form. And previously I'd have never written that because the code's boring. It's a
Yeah.
crud application. It's not an interesting application. I was used to, I think, be more of a thinker, but now all of a sudden the builder in me has gone, wow, I can build stuff.
Hmm. And yeah, okay. Because I was thinking the Atari 2600 thing does sound like a bit more of a thinker side, but then
For
also
sure.
the go-karting thing as well sounds like you just want to think about the I don't know, think about the
Well, the
results of it.
cool thing,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
show you how
it's
much
quite
of a
good.
thinker I was
Yes, maybe
on
you've
the
moved along the axis a little bit.
well, to show you how much of the thinker side I had with the emulator. So the Atari VCS has got a 6502 processor. So
Right.
it's got an instruction set. And if you've ever worked with sort of a processor, you go through implementing the various different instructions. They update the different registers, and there's quite a repetitive process that you go through implementing them. And then I took a
Hmm.
step back and looked at the specification and thought, I'm pretty sure I can actually generate the code directly from this ASCII specification. So I got halfway through it, threw it away, then created a parser for the specification, and then a CPU generator based on the abstract syntax tree that I'd constructed. So yeah, thinker.
Wow. Okay. I wonder if there were no printing errors in the in the specification. I hope. That would have thrown things off
Funnily
completely.
enough, I was talking to some other people about it, and they said, the fun thing about this particular processor is there are quite a lot of undocumented edge cases. It was back in the day where so many of the best games used hacks that
Yeah,
were
right.
not
They've got
in any way documented.
all these weird, yeah, weird features of the processor that nobody had.
Yeah,
Yeah.
timing
So,
quirks and so on.
yeah, I think sort of trying to wrap up now. One of the things that I saw today, just today, is that you've started a new um, newsletter, right? You've got a
Oh
newsletter.
yeah,
Is this your way of trying to keep abreast of everything and
yeah,
keep an eye on what's going on in the?
yeah. So whilst I think, as I mentioned, AI is going to have a huge impact, the area that I think it's going to have the most immediate impact is software development. And
Yeah.
I found myself reading a lot of blog posts and, having my own thoughts, and I kept my own notes because it was moving so quickly. So I thought an obvious thing was to just turn that into the newsletter. And it's just a good way for me to keep on top of what's happening, but also just share some in the moment high level thoughts. So for example, the Cloudflare cloning of Next.js. That was in the most recent episode.
Right.
And
Yeah.
someone else published a blog post that said tests are the new moat, for example. And you can, if you keep on top of it, you can see the running narrative. And as I mentioned, the significant number of typically senior engineers who are starting to sound a bit sad about AI. It's
Mm.
really interesting to see the themes and the patterns emerge. Yeah, I'm enjoying doing that. It's a lot of fun.
What's it called?
AI augmented AI augmented coding weekly.
Yes. Okay. Good. We just have to put that in there to make so that people have somewhere to go. Good. All
Cool.
right. Is there anything? Is there actually? Are there any other resources or books or podcasts that you listen to keep abreast of everything, or you want to shout any
Yeah,
out?
I think my favorite, I'd have to look it up. There's a podcast that I find really good. The AI Daily Brief, I think it's called. And
Right.
it's a bit of a misnomer because it's not daily, it's every other day, but that's still pretty good. And
Good effort though.
I just like it. The presenter is super enthusiastic about AI, but he's got a very balanced view as well. He doesn't just run away with the hype. He's more than happy to critique and consider. And he tends to, whilst I'm generally focused more on the impact on software development, he's got a bit of a kind of Silicon Valley background and talks about
Right.
things like data center investments, the potential IPOs for OpenAI. And it's just a good way for me to keep up with the broader AI world without being fed hype,
Yeah.
which is hard to find at the moment.
There's so much, isn't there? It's including all the new models. I feel like all the
Yeah,
benchmarking is being gamed and all the models are just absolute hype fests these days. And
yeah,
then when you
absolutely.
try and use them, yeah, you discover it's not usually as good as they said it would be.
Exactly. On this podcast, I mean, he mentions the model releases, but generally speaking, they're not that interesting anymore. It's much more interesting is what people are building with them.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, Claudebot or Maltbot or whatever
Right.
OpenClaw,
Yeah.
whatever it became in the end, it has gained a lot of conversation. I think it's Nathaniel. Yeah, he's talked about his view is that Claudebot is much more interesting because it's the very first time we've seen effectively a real AI agent where it's been packaged in a completely different way. The way that it's fully autonomous, the way that it's working in the background on long running goals. From an implementation perspective, it's got things like cron jobs, but basically it's the AI that most normal people imagine when you say you've got an AI assistant. It's
Yeah.
the first time that you've actually got something because we've talked about AI assistants before and you give people chat GPT, they go, this is my AI assistant. What do I do with it? Whereas Claudebot is the first one where it's actually felt like an AI assistant. And
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing.
Have you run it yourself yet?
No, not
No.
yet.
No,
I've
me neither.
taken some of the Claudebot concepts, and I now have. I tend to use Claude Code, and I've got various
Nice.
skills that I run on schedules. So I've again to me, Claudebot is an implementation. The more interesting thing is what it represents.
Yeah. I quite like the idea of it, but there's never been a
Yeah,
more obvious example of where you need an AI governance framework.
yeah,
All these people are
yeah,
just going, "Oh, my emails have gone. I've spent $2,000 on credits this week," or something like this. And it's
yeah,
just like, yeah, this is what AI governance is about, mate. This is why we need that.
yeah. Yeah, and my Claude bot has now started buying more tokens for itself.
Yeah.
Yay!
There was that tweet a few weeks ago. I told Claudebot to run its own portfolio and invest in the market. It was doing all kinds of an analysis and all these charts and figuring it all out. It lost all the money within a week, but it was beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
I think that's a good place to end, right? Because we're back on
Yes,
on risk. We're back where we started from.
cool.
And the importance of risk frameworks with AI. All right, Colin, this has been really good. Thanks
Yeah,
for joining. And yeah, it's great to see you. I'll go and have a great weekend. And
yeah. Cheers.
I'll
Enjoy the
see you
chat.
soon. All right.
I'll
Cheers.
get on my bike and head back home.
Nice
Cheers,
one.
Rob.
Thanks for doing this. All right. Bye bye.